You know, the voice of Saturday Night Live, Don Pardo, has died. He introduced the cast for more than 30 years.
Don Pardo spent 60 years as the voice of NBC. He was one of only 3 people ever given a lifetime contract. But in 1981, someone tried to fire him live on national television. The plan was stopped at the last moment. Still, they removed him from Saturday Night Live and replaced him with someone else. What happened during that lost season nearly destroyed the show. And the real reason they brought him back had nothing to do with his talent. The story behind those missing months reveals something nobody expected about the man America thought they knew. It all begins with the smell of warm bread drifting through a small bakery in Westfield, Massachusetts, because that is where Dominic George Pardo took his first breath on February 22, 1918. His parents had crossed the Atlantic from Poland with almost nothing, hoping those baking skills would build a safer future in America. They moved from Westfield to Norwich, and then to Providence, chasing stability one loaf at a time. His father dreamed that Don would eventually take over the bakery, since that was the kind of dream immigrant parents carried close to their hearts. Don tried to honor that hope by imagining futures that sounded respectable, like dentistry or law. Yet something inside him kept nudging him toward performing. That small inner pull slowly grew louder, creating a quiet tension in the home as old-world expectations met new-world possibility, shaping every choice he made in those early years as if the path ahead had already started whispering his name. The whisper grew clearer when he was in his final year at Norwich Free Academy because he won a public speaking prize that made people stop and stare at the sound of his voice. Before that moment, he had already tasted performance while playing Bob Cratchit in A Christmas Carol, and he loved how it felt to stand on a stage. Still, he kept thinking of his father's bakery dreams and wondered if dentistry or law might help him repay everything his parents had sacrificed. Then his guidance counselor pulled him aside and urged him to look toward broadcasting instead. The counselor said his voice carried something rare, something that didn't belong in a courtroom or a dentist's chair. That single conversation pushed open a door Don didn't know he was allowed to walk through. And soon he was taking speech classes with a seriousness that felt like destiny, forming step by step. Everything shifted again in 1938 when Don was 20 and made 2 choices that shaped the rest of his life. He married Catherine Lyons, who believed in him with a calm confidence, and he accepted a radio announcing job at WJAR for $30 a week. The offer came while he was performing with the 20th Century Players, and the station manager noticed how he could read long blocks of copy without a stumble. It paid far less than his steady job at Brown and Sharp, and during those long Depression years, turning down stability looked foolish to almost everyone. Catherine didn't see it that way. She told him to take the radio job because she knew this was the road he was meant to follow. That choice felt risky, yet it became the foundation of a career that would eventually span 6 decades. Her support didn't stop there. It seeped into every year of their long marriage, shaping a home where dreams felt safe to chase. That first bold step led Don to NBC in 1944, where he built a 60-year legacy while he and Catherine raised 5 children named Donna, Karen, Paula, David, and Michael. She stayed steady beside him until her death in 1995, and even though she never saw his final years on Saturday Night Live, her encouragement flowed through every introduction he ever made. It was her voice in the background of his, guiding him long after she was gone. His rise continued in Boston at Emerson College, where he graduated in 1942 after spending 4 years treating communication as an art that deserved discipline. He didn't rely only on talent. He broke down speech the way a musician studies tone, learning how to turn breath, rhythm, and clarity into something precise and controlled. Radio was exploding across America in the 1930s, And Emerson buzzed with excitement as students imagined futures lit by the glow of broadcast studios. Don fit into that moment so naturally that by the time he graduated, the networks were already searching for strong voices because World War II had created shortages everywhere. When NBC hired him in 1944, he stepped into the building like someone who had trained his whole life for exactly that room, and the foundation of his 70-year career settled into place. Years later, he would find himself standing in a booth during one of America's darkest hours. On November 22, 1963, at exactly 1:45:03 p.m., he interrupted regular programming to announce that President Kennedy had been shot. The words were spare and heavy, and he could not know that a 20-year-old viewer named Phil Grease was recording the audio on a reel-to-reel machine at home. 2 minutes later, at about 1:47 p.m., Don delivered the even heavier bulletin that struck the entire nation at once. His voice traveled into millions of homes while he stood in the studio completely unaware that history was taking shape around him. In the chaos of that booth, he became the network's first messenger of tragedy, and the sound of his voice etched itself into the country's memory. Behind him, the technical world was unraveling. NBC's cameras needed 11 minutes to warm up, which meant that from 1:45 p.m. to 1:57 p.m., the broadcast had no images at all. Viewers only heard voices, while the screen displayed a still network slide. Chet Huntley and Bill Ryan began speaking at 1:53 p.m., but only audio reached the public. Finally, at exactly 1:57 p.m., one camera flickered alive and NBC started recording. Everything before that moment vanished, and those first 12 minutes were never captured by the network. Entire fragments of chaos and fear simply dissolved because the technology of the time was slower than the news it needed to carry. For 34 years, people believed those missing minutes were gone forever, until the late 1990s when Phil Grease revealed that his recording had survived. It contained Pardo's bulletins and the first 3 minutes and 53 seconds of live NBC coverage. In 1998, shortly after Don celebrated his 80th birthday, Grease called him and played the audio back. Don listened to the sound of his younger self and realized he was hearing something he had never expected to hear again. Those recordings were later given to both the Kennedy Library and the Library of Congress, preserving the voice he didn't know had been saved. During the frantic minutes after the shooting, Don found himself pushed into a role he had never trained for. As a booth announcer, he usually introduced programs and read commercial copy, but now he had to read fast-breaking wire bulletins while the newsroom erupted behind him. Phones rang non-stop, teletype machines clattered, reporters shouted across the room. He held the microphone because no one else was ready, and he stayed in that role until Huntley, Brinkley, and Frank McGee were assembled to take over. He later described the scene as pure pandemonium, and even after many years, the memory of that chaos stayed sharp in his mind. Long before that day, though, he had already stepped into television history. In 1952, he announced Winner Take All and joined the world of live game shows where every mistake went straight to air. His work with RCA's color television demonstrations helped show audiences the future before they even knew they needed it. NBC valued him so much that they eventually gave him a lifetime contract, a rare gesture that acknowledged how deeply his voice had become part of the network's identity. His work grew even richer when he joined The Price is Right in 1956 beside Bill Cullen, a man who kept a schedule almost impossible to imagine. Cullen arrived at his radio studio at 5:45 a.m. every weekday, hosted his morning show, then walked 9 blocks to the television theater for the 10:30 a.m. broadcast. He never rehearsed. Instead, Jim Holland, an actor, rehearsed for him and briefed him in the makeup chair minutes before airtime. Producer Bob Stewart trusted Cullen so completely that he brushed off NBC's concerns by saying he would rather have Cullen unrehearsed than any other host prepared. During the show, Cullen kept cheat sheets in his pocket to stay on track, and Don watched him juggle chaos with ease. Their chemistry became part of the show's magic. Don read long rule announcements for the home viewer showcase, detailed lines about postmarks and eligibility, while Cullen played with wind-up toys to make the moment fun. Cullen tested appliances, lounged on recliners, and shot pool during prize presentations. His spontaneity fit perfectly with Don's polished authority, creating a rhythm that felt lively and effortless to viewers. When the show moved to ABC in 1963, Don stayed behind because of his NBC contract. Johnny Gilbert stepped in, and years later, Gilbert became the voice of Jeopardy starting in 1984. Meanwhile, Johnny Olson occasionally substituted for Don, and eventually became the iconic announcer for the Bob Barker era of The Price is Right, starting in 1972. The patterns of their careers wove together in unexpected ways, forming a history that stretched across decades and shows. Jeopardy also carries part of Don's legacy. From 1964 to 1975, he didn't introduce Art Fleming as the host. He called him the star of Jeopardy, giving the show a dignity it carried proudly. His style helped shape the program's tone during a time when quiz shows were recovering from scandal and trying to rebuild trust. Even though he didn't return for the 1978 revival, his 11-year presence remained part of the show's blueprint. Through the years, he protected his voice with almost sacred care. In 1985, he admitted in an interview that his voice felt like his Achilles heel because anytime he got sick, it hit his throat first. That fear guided every habit he formed. He carried cough drops, watched temperature changes, warmed up his voice like an athlete preparing muscles, and avoided anything that strained his vocal cords. He missed only one SNL episode before 2013 because of laryngitis, and that single absence proved how seriously he guarded his instrument across 70 years and 64 days of uninterrupted NBC service. His announcing style seemed natural to him, yet it set the standard for everyone who followed. In interviews, he demonstrated how he stretched vowels and placed pauses to build anticipation. He made simple phrases sound like events. Announcers like Randy Thomas and Joe Cipriano later said his delivery shaped their own careers, showing how authority and warmth could live in the same breath. Darrell Hammond discovered that Don didn't switch voices on and off. He walked through the SNL studios reading memos as if they were dramatic monologues, turning everyday lines into pure performance. When Hammond substituted for him during his laryngitis episode, he studied Don's delivery so closely that even Don's sister-in-law thought she was listening to the real thing. Don found the imitation so good, he joked that he should be taking lessons. Bob Stewart once said that Don could silence an entire audience with a lift of his hand. It was a power that blended presence, timing, and instinct. His announcer booth at Studio 8H sat on the same spot where Arturo Toscanini once conducted the NBC Symphony Orchestra, and the parallel felt fitting. Don conducted audiences too, guiding energy with nothing more than his voice and the quiet confidence of someone who understood exactly how to move a room. Don Pardo stepped into a surprising world in December 1976 when he joined Frank Zappa on stage at New York City's Palladium. The concerts ran from December 26th to December 29th and drew 14,000 fans across 4 sold-out shows. It all began after Zappa's appearance on Saturday Night Live in October 1976, where the two first worked together. People never expected the straight-framed NBC voice to walk into Zappa's rebellious universe, yet Pardo embraced it with ease. He delivered the narration for I'm the Slime, speaking the sharp lines about television's numbing effects even though television was the very medium that made him famous. Soon he was stepping into songs like Punky's Whips and the Illinois Enema Bandit, showing that he was not afraid of Zappa's wild edges and that he enjoyed stretching his voice beyond cue cards and official scripts. The crowd heard a man who was willing to cross a line most announcers never touched, and he blended into Zappa's world far more naturally than anyone imagined. Those December shows turned into something even more lasting when Zappa released Zappa in New York in 1978. The recordings were handled by engineer Bob Lifton, and although Zappa added heavy overdubs early in 1977 at the record plant in Los Angeles, he kept Pardo's live vocals untouched. This meant listeners heard Pardo exactly as he sounded in front of those roaring Palladium crowds while narrating I'm the Slime, Punky's Whips, and the Illinois Enema Bandit. The album carried him into Zappa's cult circles, where people began to see him as more than the familiar Saturday Night Live voice. His warm but commanding tone shifted into something that fit the odd corners of experimental rock, revealing a different range that had rarely been shown in mainstream broadcasting. Even without intention, Pardo became part of Zappa's myth, frozen forever in a double album that introduced him to an entirely new audience. That willingness to play along also shaped one of the strangest and most beloved music videos of the 1980s. On June 4, 1984, Weird Al Yankovic released I Lost on Jeopardy! Just 3 months before the game show returned with Alex Trebek in September 1984. The video brought back the original host, Art Fleming, and the original announcer, Don Pardo. They filmed it on the same set used from 1964 to 1975, creating a final reunion before everything changed for the revival. Yankovic's parody included categories like TV themes, nuclear physics, world geography, food, potpourri, and famous accordion players, and his rivals were a plumber and an architect who both held PhD degrees. Pardo delivered one of the most unforgettable moments when he began reading the list of prizes Yankovic did not win, paused, tossed the script aside, and tore into him with a fierce improvised rant. Fans still repeat that moment because it showed how Pardo's comic instinct matched Weird Al's energy perfectly. The video became even more surreal when Greg Kihn appeared at the end. His 1983 hit Jeopardy! Was the song being parodied, and instead of keeping his distance, he joined the joke. After Pardo called Yankovic a complete loser, and the contestant was thrown out of the studio, Kihn sat behind the wheel of the car Yankovic landed in, smiling at the chaos. Dr. Demento also appeared, tying together everyone who had shaped Yankovic's early career. The parody climbed to number 83 on the Hot 100 and allowed both the original song and the parody to share space in the cultural spotlight. The mix of game show legends, rock musicians, and comedy creators made the video feel like a time capsule of pure 1984 energy. As the years moved forward, Pardo found himself stepping into film roles that kept playing with his announcer image. In 1987, Woody Allen cast him in Radio Days as the booming voice behind Guess That Tune, a fictional radio game show set in the 1930s and 1940s. Allen wanted him because his sound carried the weight of real broadcast history. Then in 1992, Pardo appeared in Stay Tuned as a game show announcer guiding a couple trapped inside their television. That same year, he provided voiceovers for Honeymoon in Vegas. These small but meaningful film moments showed how proudly he leaned into the world that shaped him, while also being willing to poke fun at it. Everything shifted back to the beginning of Saturday Night Live, each time people remembered October 11, 1975. When the show premiered that night at 11:30 p.m., Pardo's voice arrived moments after the cold open, with Michael O'Donoghue, John Belushi, and Chevy Chase. He slipped and called the cast the not-for-ready primetime players rather than the not-ready-for primetime players, yet the slip only made him more human. His voice wrapped itself around the show instantly, tying it to the history he carried from June 15, 1944, when he first joined NBC. George Carlin performed stand-up sets instead of sketches, and Billy Preston and Janice Ian played the music. But it was Pardo's announcement that gave the entire premiere a sense of shape. Inside Studio 8H, his announcing booth sat almost exactly where Arturo Toscanini had once conducted the NBC Symphony Orchestra between 1937 and 1950. Pardo often thought about that while working. He felt honored that his voice filled the same space where classical music giants once stood. The studio had been built for orchestra acoustics, and Pardo loved knowing he was part of that lineage. Whenever he stepped into his booth, he felt like he was guarding the stretch of NBC history that moved from radio greatness to modern television comedy. This connection deepened even more when NBC awarded him something almost no one else ever received. He became one of only 3 people with a lifetime contract at the network, joining Milton Berle and Bob Hope. It was a rare honor in an industry known for constant turnover. He stayed with NBC for 60 years as a staff announcer, retiring in 2004 but continuing with SNL afterward. Even after he moved to Tucson following his wife's death in 1995, he returned to New York every week to announce the show until travel became too difficult. Lorne Michaels always explained Pardo's importance simply. The opening sequence changed every year, but it never felt alive until people heard his voice. When Michaels put together the show in 1974 and scanned the list of NBC announcers, he reacted to Pardo's name with excitement. He wanted a voice that linked the new show to the beginnings of television itself. Michaels and the cast felt the difference deeply during the 2 episodes Pardo missed in Season 7. Molly Shannon used to whisper a prayer every time Pardo said her name, and when she shared this ritual with Amy Poehler in 2001, Poehler embraced it as well. That moment of hearing Pardo's voice held meaning far beyond the credits. Pardo's commitment to the show lasted 38 seasons, making him the longest-serving member in Saturday Night Live history. From 1975 until his death on August 18, 2014, he missed only 1 season and only a few individual episodes. He announced 725 episodes in total. Even in his final years, he traveled from Tucson to New York each week until he physically could no longer make the trip. His final recordings came in May 2014 for the season 39 finale, and they closed a 70-year connection to NBC that no one else has matched. The story took a sharp turn in 1981 when Michael O'Donoghue returned to the show with plans to tear everything down and rebuild it. He believed SNL needed something bold, something dangerous, and his ideas included firing Don Pardo. At one point, he even wanted to fire him live on air. Producer Dick Ebersol stopped that plan, but agreed to remove Pardo from his announcing duties. This ended the 6-year streak that had helped define the show. It was the only time in nearly 4 decades that Pardo was pushed away from the microphone. NBC replaced him with Mel Brandt, who began announcing on October 3, 1981. Brandt was also part of the network's long history and was well known for saying, "This program is brought to you in living color" during the 1960s. Bill Hanrahan joined him for a couple of episodes, filling in when needed. Even though Pardo lost his SNL spot, his lifetime contract meant NBC still paid him his full salary. The change felt strange to everyone because Pardo was still an NBC employee, just no longer the voice of Saturday night. That season removed more than just Pardo. The famous phrase, "live from New York, it's Saturday night," disappeared entirely. Host monologues faded, replaced with awkward introductions, where everyone simply stood together on stage. The show's spirit dimmed. Audience numbers sank. By December 1981, O'Donoghue was fired after erupting during a production meeting and lashing out at cast members. The season eventually became one of the most criticized in SNL history. Everything began to shift back when Lorne Michaels returned in 1982. His very first move was to bring Pardo back for the October 2nd premiere. It signaled that the show was reclaiming its identity. Michaels remembered hiring Pardo in 1975 and wanting his voice more than anyone else. Bringing him back reset the atmosphere of Studio 8H and restored the familiar sound that audiences had missed. Pardo stayed with the show for 32 more years, proving how important that decision had been. Through it all, Pardo never criticized anyone for firing him. He stayed gracious. He once said he did not even know he had a lifetime contract until he tried to retire, and NBC explained it to him. When the network called him back in 1982, he returned quietly and kept working. Lorne Michaels later described him as a warm presence who made new cast members feel safe. For Bobby Moynihan, that warmth hit him immediately. When Pardo said his name for the first time on September 13, 2008, Moynihan cried until September 16th. He said it openly on Twitter and later explained that the sound of Pardo's voice calling him into SNL was overwhelming. It made his dream feel real on a level he could not hold back. Molly Shannon felt something similar and created her own ritual. Each time Pardo said her name, she whispered a small prayer of gratitude. When Amy Poehler joined the show in 2001, Shannon shared the ritual with her. Poehler kept it alive and described how much it meant to hear his voice wrap around her name each week. Poehler spoke about the impact again after Pardo died in August 2014. She said her whole life changed once he announced her. Not just her career, but her entire life. She remembered funny backstage moments with him and called him a kind and talented man whose presence mattered far more than most people understood. Darrell Hammond also carried his own memory. On the day of his first dress rehearsal in 1995, he stopped practicing his Ted Koppel impression when he realized Pardo was about to announce the cast. He left his dressing room and waited in the hallway just to hear Pardo say his name over the speakers. He wanted to remember that moment forever before stepping onto the stage. When Pardo passed away, tributes poured in. Tina Fey called him a sweet, sweet man and said late night would never sound as cool again. Jimmy Fallon said nothing compared to hearing Pardo say your name. Fallon once impersonated him so convincingly that Pardo's relatives were fooled, yet even Fallon admitted that no copy could ever replace the real thing. One of Pardo's most joyful moments came on February 23, 2008, when he turned 90 during a live SNL show. At the end of the night, which drifted into February 24th, the cast gathered around a huge cake with all 90 candles lit. Tina Fey kissed him on the cheek, and the audience cheered as Pardo took a breath and blew out every candle. It became his final on-screen appearance, even though he continued announcing for 6 more years. His dedication showed in the way he traveled. After retiring in 2004 and settling in Tucson, he still flew from Arizona to New York every week during production season. He made the trip through Tucson to Dallas to New York, arriving on Fridays, warming up the audience on Saturdays, and flying home Sundays. He used a wheelchair at airports, but refused to stop. Producers once tried to let him pre-record from home in 2006, but the show felt different without him in the room. They brought him back almost immediately, and he resumed the exhausting trips until 2010. In 2013, when he was 95, he broke his hip and missed episodes for only the second time in SNL history. Darrell Hammond filled in with such a perfect impression that viewers hardly noticed. He refused payment because he wanted to honor Pardo rather than take his place. He said he did not want anyone to think Pardo could be replaced because he knew the truth, which was that he could not be. By 2010, SNL finally created a permanent recording setup in Tucson, so Pardo could stop flying. Each week, a producer traveled to him with equipment so he could record the announcements from his assisted living facility. That same year, he entered the Television Academy Hall of Fame, closing a circle that had started in 1944. His final recording came on May 17, 2014. 3 months later, he passed away at age 96, leaving behind a voice that had wrapped itself into the history of American television. Cory Harrison's story began in a very different world, but carried the same early push toward adulthood. In 1992, when he was 9 years old, he started working at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, founded by his grandfather Richard Harrison and his father Rick in 1989. He was born on April 27, 1983, in Las Vegas, and grew up with his brother Adam and half-brother Jake. His parents, Rick and Kim, divorced in 1984 when he was still a toddler. While other kids played after school, Cory polished jewelry and learned the pawn trade bit by bit, absorbing lessons about customers, value, and negotiation long before he understood how unusual his childhood was. The years rolled forward, and he moved from polishing knobs to managing the shop with 30 employees under him. His personality earned him the nickname Big Hoss, and his instincts helped him become one of the top buyers in the store. The shop never slept because Las Vegas never slept, and Cory learned to navigate the constant flow of people bringing in everything from antiques to strange collectibles. Rick slowly prepared him to inherit the business, believing Cory had the temperament to lead it someday. The pressure eventually rose, and by season 7 of Pawn Stars, Cory confronted his father about wanting a 10% partnership. Their arguments were real, not staged. Rick later admitted the tension was heavy both on screen and off. Cory threatened to leave for another job if he did not receive ownership. He ultimately stayed after receiving a raise and a 5% stake, with the possibility of more later. The conflicts created cracks in the family, but also showed how seriously Cory took his future. Then came a harsh turn in 2010, when Cory reached 402 pounds at age 27. His doctor put him on medication to prevent diabetes and warned him about the risk he faced. The fear hit him so hard that he drove straight from the appointment to a lap band surgery center and scheduled the procedure immediately. It cost more money than he had, so he used 4 different credit cards just to pay for it. In the first 6 weeks, he lost 50 pounds. By the end of the first year, he had lost another 100. He kept going until he dropped 192 pounds, reaching about 210 pounds by training in the gym and boxing 12 rounds a day, 5 days a week. Then, in January 2024, Cory suffered a loss that cut far deeper than anything else. His younger brother Adam died at age 39 from an accidental overdose involving fentanyl and methamphetamine toxicity. Adam had never appeared on Pawn Stars, but his death brought national attention to the fentanyl crisis. Rick spoke to Fox News Digital about how serious the epidemic had become. Cory posted an old childhood photo of the two of them with the words, "I will always love you, Bubba." The pain lingered as the family tried to move forward. In 2025, Cory decided to step away from the spotlight. He did not renew his contract with the History Channel and moved to Tulum, Mexico. There he began developing a barbecue restaurant, choosing a new life far from the pawn counter he had stood behind since age 9. Fans wondered what this meant for the future of the show, but Cory seemed ready to build something of his own after decades of family pressure and personal challenges.